After I got through basic training, I then went to Kansas with a girlfriend, and I started working, guess what, nights. And I had worked a short time in Cleveland at a general hospital, and most of them were Ukrainian and all different Eastern European origins of people, didn't speak any English. I was running that floor by myself with one aide, and there were 40 patients, and they were sick. And I got there were young men, and they were not nearly as sick, and they could get up and do things and so on, and I thought, well, I'm going to, this is not so bad. About 2 months into that excursion, I talked to several sergeants who had been over in Vietnam in the early, this was 1966, so they'd been there in 65, and they were telling me what they had been doing. They had been wearing guns, they had been, out in the boondocks. It sounded very exciting. I didn't think about danger at that time, but just excitement. And so I applied, and 2 days later I got my orders saying, congratulations, you're going to Vietnam. Now that was a little fast, but just before that, a day before that, I'd called my mother, who was teaching school in Hudson, Ohio, and said, Mom, I'm going to Vietnam. And there was dead silence on the other side of the phone. I'd pulled her out of class, and she obviously was not happy. Now to Frankie. Frankie came from Southern California, and her background was, her mother and father were not farmers or not, I'm not sure exactly, I remember what her father did, but her mother just mainly went to the club. At least that's how I read it. But she had never really been in a life where she really had to produce things. She spent a lot of time on the beach and so on. But when she got in, and it was this book is done about a year after I was there, it was about the same for all of us, and we had to grow up right away. And if we didn't, we were sent home. We were discharged dishonorably and sent home. Her mother wanted her to get married and have kids right away. And that had never been something that I'd wanted to do, and obviously Frankie didn't want to do it either. She wanted to see some of the world. And I think she wanted to grow up and get out of the house. Frankie also was at the 36th Evac in Vung Tau, which is along the ocean. So her hospital was on the ocean, and they could go swimming in the South China Sea. It was all tents. Mine was an old French building. She was sent to take care of men who, if they lived, would probably ultimately get operated on. If they didn't, they would just die there. That's part of the triage system. And after I'd been there for about a week and a half, I was asleep at about 5 o'clock in the morning. I heard a huge explosion, and the field telephone in the billet started to ring, and we all had to go to the hospital because the VC had blown up a bachelor housing and had injured over 100 men. And we had to, because we already had 100 patients in the hospital, we had to discharge as many as we could, which was most of them, back to the units. We had to get the beds ready, and we had to start triaging the patients. And there was a system under triage where there were 4 categories. The first was the walking wounded, and we put tags on them, put their names on them, and we listed what we thought was wrong with them. And then if they were walking wounded, they could go up to the 4th floor of the hospital and be taken care of up there. The second group were the ones who could be operated on in a short amount of time and probably live from it. Broken bones, probably not head wounds or stomach or chest wounds, because those took a lot of time and a lot of equipment, and too long, so that other people would die before they were finished operating on. So that was the second group, and we would put the number 2 on there. The doctors would come and look at them. We also could, and with this, decide what the injury was. Like, I've picked out several that had been wounded by shrapnel that had entry wounds but no exit wound. So that meant that the shrapnel was still rocking around inside them.